Hello everyone, I'm Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. My first tip, this is our first tip video, is the accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. In quilting, there's only 3 things you have to do accurately. You have to cut accurately, you have to sew accurately, and you have to press accurately. So let's start with the cutting. You come home from the quilt shop with the fabric off the bolt. And then some of you may want to wash it, and that's okay too. Wash and non-wash is one of the biggest controversies in quilting. I personally do not wash, but do as you like. If there's wrinkles in it, like I can see wrinkles here, I would go over to the ironing board and I would press it. And if my quilt instructions are to cut small strips, 1.5 inches, 2 inches, I would definitely starch it. Either starch with a regular Niagara from the grocery store, or Mary Ellen's Best Press is an excellent product for firming up the fabric to make it easier to cut, which is actually more important in smaller piecing than larger piecing. So now pretend my fabric is ironed and we are going to cut. The first thing we want to do is make a straight edge so that you have an exact 90-degree turn, so when you cut your strips there's no elbows or bends at the fold. I'm going to put my glasses on, and you need a good ruler. This is the Quilter Select ruler, Alex Anderson's ruler. I really like it because once you put it down it doesn't move. Another excellent brand is Creative Grids, and this is a big one. I use this sometimes when I have a wider strip than 6.5 inches. This is really the standard size that I use. You may notice the numbers are different on this. This is old style. If you bought this ruler today, you would have numbers on it that look like this, that are very, very clear. But for now, I'm going to use the Quilter Select ruler. Now, I'm a right-hander, so I've got the fabric I'm going to square up on this side. If you're a lefty, you're flipped over and you're squaring up on this side. But you're going to take a horizontal line on the ruler and line it up with the fold of the fabric. Iron wants to be tended to. And now you're going to cut. Now, if you have a ruler that's going to move around a lot, you're going to really have to crawl up your hands as you cut. In this ruler, it just doesn't move. So start below your fold, and your rotary cutter should be approximately 45 degrees. And then you're just going to push and always close your blade. These blades are sharp. If you drop it while you're wearing sandals, you could cut your foot, or if you have pets or children in the house, you want to be very, very careful. This is waste. This goes in the dog bed stuffing scrap pile. Now that you've got a 90-degree angle, you're going to flip to the other side to cut your strip. Lefties, you do the opposite. You take from this side and flip over to this side. I want to cut a 1.5 inch strip. So I can see on my ruler, this is the 1.5 inch line, and I'm going to line that up on the edge of the fabric. And then same as I did on the other side, start below the fold. If you're cutting and the very beginning doesn't cut, but the rest all does, you started too high up. You have to start below the fold. Now you have your 1.5 inch strip, and you would cut across to whatever your pattern instructions directions say. So now that you've accurately cut a 1.5 inch strip, you need to make sure you have the correct seam allowance. And you'll hear the words a scant 1/4 inch an awful lot in quilting. I don't like that word. I want the seam allowance that will make your piecing be the correct size. So you need to know your own machine. Everybody's machine is different. So I'm using the Bernina 570. I have the single hole plate in so that straight stitch plate, so that I don't have the oval that your fabric can get pushed down into. I also use the dual feed, which makes the top feed at the same rate as the feed dogs feed the bottom. And I'm going to take 2 pieces of fabric that I've cut 1.5 inches. And be sure when you test this that you've cut the 1.5 inches, because your friend could cut them differently and use a different ruler. So make sure you cut the sample pieces. And I am going to go to the sewing machine, and I am using the 1/4 inch foot. I have a 1/4 inch mark up close to the foot. I have one on the tray here and another one here. I like to look at this one the most and the side of the foot the most. But you find out what works for you. You keep testing this until you get it right. So I am going to start. I need my knee lift here to get straight. And I am looking at the side of the foot. And then when we press, whatever direction you want to press to, you have that piece on the top. In this particular instance, pressing direction doesn't make any difference because all we're doing is testing our 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I first set the seam, and now I'm going to make my iron do the work. And I'm going to press that. And now I'm going to take the other side. And when I first sewed this, I sewed from here to here. If I was making a big strip set of 12 or 15 fabrics, I would sew one this way, one this way, one this way. Why do you go from opposite ends? You go from opposite ends because if you sew in the same direction, especially if you don't have a dual feed, the feed dogs push the fabric and you end up with a bowed strip. You don't want a bowed strip. So this doesn't much matter for 3 of these, but since I sewed this one this way, I'm going to sew this one the opposite direction. Let's see how I do on film, if I can measure it out to an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. So my piece should measure 3.5 inches across, and I will go into quilter's math in another episode, but you do your math first without the seam allowance and then add it on in the back. So even though we have 3 1.5 inch strips, they finish to 1. So 1, 2, 3 plus the half is 3.5 versus 1.5 times 3 being 4.5 in real math. So let's see how I did. That looks excellent. It's exactly in 3.5 inches, and you can see the marks here. Mark here to here is exactly 1 inch. So we are good. If you get a piece that's bigger than 3.5 inches, then your seam allowance is too small. If you get a piece that's smaller than 3.5 inches, your seam allowance is too big. So what you want to do is keep testing till you get it accurately. It's one of the most important things in getting flat nice piecing. Now, the other thing that's really important for your blocks to meet is nesting of the seams. And that's where pressing directions come into play. That's really important. And I just made this little sample. It's, again, 1.5-inch strips. So it should measure 2.5, and it does. And I'm just going to make a little 4-patch so you can see how the seams nest. Now, normally, if I have more than one seam meeting, I will pin and I will sew over pins. Don't tell Bernina. I use very thin pins. I love these magic pins. In this case, I will not use them because I only have one seam to meet. And that is the easiest of all nesting seams. If I have more than one, I will pin. So I'm going to cut segments now of 1.5 inches so that I can make a little 4-patch. So my first cut, I overcut the edge because this is crooked. So now I will straighten it out by flipping it around. And then I would go across. One thing, don't forget, don't let these salvages get into your quilt. Don't let them in your quilt top. Make sure they get cut off at some point. Some people cut them off before they strip piece. I cut them off after I strip piece. It doesn't make any difference. Don't let them into the back of your quilt, the backing of the quilt. They are more tightly woven than the body of the fabric. And so when you wash them, they will shrink differently. So it's really important that you get the salvages off at some point. Okay, so now we're going to put these together. And to make a little 4-patch, we're going to match the seams. And the one thing you want to do when you feed these into the sewing machine, you want this seam facing forward. And the reason you want that seam facing forward is that the feed dogs will push these seams together. If you sewed on this side and had it facing you, the feed dogs would push them apart. We want them to stay together. Okay. Put this in, and as most of you already know, you want to chain piece. You're not going to cut in between these. And I will use my seam ripper to hold these together as they go through. And the idea here is not to race. The idea is not to be the fastest sewer. The idea is to be an accurate sewer so that your blocks end up being the right size and all your points meet properly. Okay. Oh, great. Doesn't want to come out. There we go. So I'd snip them apart and let's see how they came out. Look at that. Perfect intersection. Perfect intersection. That's what you want. And if they didn't meet up right for me, I would rip them and redo them. I don't say close enough. So That's my first video. Accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance, nesting the seams for perfect intersections meeting. There are exceptions to this rule where if you have too much bulk, you might have to press them open. But for now, try to nest your seams perfectly. Thanks for joining me. If you have any questions, please put them in the comment section. If there's anything you'd like to hear more about, please put that there as well. Also, you can check me out on my Instagram page, Quilters Heaven Inc., and we'll see the link below. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.